Hello and welcome to today's webinar on volunteer opportunities at AmericanAncestors.org. My name is Ginevra Morse, Director of Education and Online Programs here at New England Historic Genealogical Society. I will be moderating today's event. NEHGS is a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history and are pleased to offer this webinar today for our members and friends around the world. Giving today's presentation is Database Services Volunteer Coordinator Rachel Adams and Database Coordinator Molly Rogers. Rachel oversees our database volunteer recruitment program and works alongside volunteers here in the library and provides support to our many remote volunteers working from home. Rachel graduated from Massachusetts College of Art and Design and interned for NEHGS before taking on this role earlier this year. Molly works on our database collections, maintaining the accuracy of current databases, and also manages teams of volunteers to transcribe and add new collections. Originally from York, Pennsylvania, Molly studied English and French at Colby College in Maine and has a master's degree in library and information science from Simmons College. So, as a nonprofit, NEHGS relies on the support and contributions made by a team of dedicated volunteers. And perhaps in no other area is their work as prolific or as evident as the databases on AmericanAncestors.org. Today, you will learn about a number of ways in which you can assist with the development of our databases, either here in our Boston library or remotely from home. We will discuss a few of the major projects that volunteers are currently working on and what tasks you may encounter as a volunteer. And then finally, we'll look at how all of that work done by our volunteers comes together and becomes a searchable database on AmericanAncestors.org. There is no handout for today's presentation, but we are recording this event, and starting tomorrow, you can easily go back and review any of the content from the presentation on our website. So with that, I will turn things over to Molly.
Hello, I'm Molly Rogers, and I'm part of the database team here at NEHGS. The database team consists of myself, our leader Don LeClaire, and Rachel, whom you'll hear from in a few minutes. Today we'll discuss the amazing work our volunteers do to help us add to and update our database collections. We are mainly accomplishing two categories of work on the database team: adding new databases and updating older databases that aren't quite up to our current standards. We currently offer 455 databases with over 1.4 billion searchable names. We'll dive into how our volunteers help us through the entire process, from a physical book or manuscript to a published searchable database online at AmericanAncestors.org. Why might you want to help us? Our volunteers' motivations vary, but many believe in helping make records more accessible to other genealogists. Some of our volunteers are personally interested in the subject matter in which they are working. Volunteering at NEHGS is also a great way to build skills and experience for a resume. For example, we can teach you about using Photoshop or best practices in handling delicate materials. We're looking for volunteers who are adventurous, flexible, and willing to learn. The various original materials that we work with are never standard, so you're always going to encounter something new. We will tell you a set of rules, and immediately the records that you have will break them. We're happy to help with any of your questions, but you do have to be okay with the fact that sometimes we also won't know the answer. Volunteers at NEHGS receive a volunteer ID, which entitles them to free admission to some museums and other cultural institutions in the Massachusetts area. To be clear, we have two types of volunteering opportunities. If it is convenient for you, you are welcome to come here to our research library in Boston. If you would prefer to work remotely from your own computer at home, we are equally happy to have your help. Some of the opportunities we will describe are only available to in-person volunteers, but there is plenty of work that can be done from home. We currently have about 100 volunteers who contributed over 9,000 hours over the last year. We already have over 2.8 million names in our Archdiocese of Boston database, a work in progress. Our volunteers helped us fully complete our Mayflower family's 5th-generation Descendants database, which is based on the General Society of Mayflower Descendants Silver Books. This database has over 500,000 names. While these numbers are impressive, never fear, we still have plenty of work that needs to be done. Here is our actual list of all of the volunteers who've helped us over the last fiscal year. Our database updates that are quantifiable in the thousands and millions are absolutely thanks to them. Next, I'll go through the major projects that they and we are currently working on. We are currently partnering with the Archdiocese of Boston to digitize their sacramental records. These records largely consist of baptisms, marriages, confirmations, and a few death records. We're creating 2 databases. The first one is free to guest members and contains only images which you can browse through. We currently have about 500 of roughly 900 volumes available. We're also working on a fully searchable database available to paying NEHGS members. This work moves a little more slowly. We have about 200 of the roughly 900 volumes completed. We are actively recruiting volunteers for all steps of the process: scanning, indexing, and proofreading. We're also working on a huge effort to re-index our flagship journal, the New England Historic and Genealogical Register. We've been publishing this journal since 1847, and it contains a variety of records pertaining to early New England and beyond. Currently, the index on our website is like the index in the back of a book. It can tell you that a name is on a page, but it does not contain rich record information such as date, location, or record type. We are in the process of re-indexing the journal so that every record is searchable by first name, last name, record type, year, location, parents' names, and spouses' names where available. This is a very large project. We're currently working on Volume 2 and anticipate that this project may take as long as 20 years to complete. Some volunteers prefer typewritten material over handwriting, but do be aware that the content of these articles can be complex, so even though it is typewritten, it's not an easy option. We are also partnering with the Society of Colonial Wars in Massachusetts to digitize their membership applications. We're currently working on creating digital images from microfilm. A volunteer needs to have patience for repetitive work to perform this task. In the future, we will move into indexing the digitized material and scanning a few of the applications that were not microfilmed. We're anticipating this database will consist of over 1,500 applications and over 70,000 records. If any of this sounds interesting to you, you will email Rachel to become a database volunteer. Include in the email which projects you are interested in, any specific research interests you have, or skills with foreign languages. We'll want to know the hours per week you think you can commit, and whether you would work from home or come here to the library. If you're interested in interning for school credit, please include a resume and a statement of interest. To volunteer for us remotely, you will need to have access to a computer, have an email address, and have familiarity with or willingness to learn Microsoft Excel. If you have a Mac, please know that we cannot accept numbers files. You will have to export them to an Excel file, and we're happy to help you with any of these options if you're not sure what I'm talking about. So what comes next after you email Rachel? She will set up a meeting with you to discuss exactly how your chosen project works and discuss any questions that you might have. This meeting can be here in person at the library or over the phone. She'll explain exactly how to index or proofread the material that she will send you. You will receive materials as JPEG and Excel files. Usually they are sent over an email in a zip file. You can get started with your work and see if it is something that you like. A few of our potential volunteers discover that they actually don't enjoy this work or have too many other commitments. We really appreciate communication. If you decide this isn't for you, please let us know so that we can assign your batch of work to someone else. Rachel will then ask you to fill out a volunteer registration form that gives us some information for staying in contact with you. And finally, as you start working, you will have questions for us. You may want clarification of the directions we've provided. As you really delve into the material, you will find unusual records. Rachel and I do our best to understand what will be in the chunks of records that we send you, but you will find non-standard items. What do you do if there is an adoption? What if the record clearly says that it could pertain either to one person or another, but it's not really sure which one? What do you do about French-Canadian D names? Feel free to email or call Rachel, and she will help with all of these problems. She will also provide you with any documentation that you will need to complete your task. You will get the NEHGS Database Style Guide and any additional help, such as Latin to English or Latin to French cheat sheets. This webinar focuses on volunteer opportunities on the database team. Our volunteer coordinator, Helen Herzer, manages volunteers for other departments. Feel free to be in touch with her if you are interested in volunteering in a different capacity. Now, I will pass off the presentation to Rachel. She will discuss the steps the volunteers complete to turn a paper book into digital files ready for the website. I will conclude at the end by discussing how these digital files are actually published to our site.
Hi, I am Rachel, the Database Services Volunteer Coordinator, and I'm going to be talking about what exactly volunteers are doing when they volunteer for us. This diagram gives you a good idea of the steps and processes that are taken. The first thing you have to do is scan the physical material that you have, then index it, and then proofread it. After that, it is ready to be published. Most of the volunteers' work is done with scanning, indexing, and proofreading. I will start with talking about the 3 different scanning methods that we use to take physical objects and get photos of. I will train new volunteers on how to use these different scanning methods, and I am available to answer questions while you are here scanning. All scanning is done on-site only. The first one is scanning books on a flatbed scanner, which we use to scan the Archdiocese books. These are 3 examples of Archdiocese books that volunteers will work with. 1 is 151 pages and weighs 1.12 pounds. 2 is 200 pages and weighs 10 pounds. 3 is 1,238 pages and weighs 11 pounds and 14 ounces. This image is showing you the same 3 books, but from a side view to give you a better idea of their size. For the actual scanning, a volunteer will open up the book. You can see this in image 1. Then turn it upside down and place it face down on the scanner. This is shown through images 2 and 3. When the book is placed face down on the flatbed scanner, the best way to get a full scan of the page is to not have the binding on the edge of the scanner. This is shown in image 5. The orange arrow is pointing to the edge of the scanner, and the blue arrow is pointing to the book's binding. In image 4, the binding of the book is placed on the edge of the scanner. The red arrow is pointing to the edge of the scanner, and the purple arrow is pointing to the binding. Sometimes the book is a rebind, and the pages were cut for this process, and now the words are in the binding, or the priest just wrote directly into the binding. In these cases, the best way to get all the words on the page is to scan the book with the binding on the edge. When scanning these books, there is not one correct way, but we have preferred ways depending on the book. The second way that we capture book pages is with a book scanner. Image 1 is a full view of what this contraption looks like. There are 2 cameras, one to photograph the left page and one to photograph the right page. The purple arrow in image 1 is pointing to the black handlebar. By pushing this up or down, it moves the bottom platform that the book will be resting on. In image 2, this is a close-up of where the book goes. The purple arrow is pointing to the handlebar that got pushed up to move the platform down. The orange arrow is pointing to this platform where there is a book resting on it. Image 3 shows the platform and book sandwiched up against the glass, ready to be photographed. Image 4, you are looking at the book pressed up against the glass. The two red arrows are pointing to where the two pieces of glass goes into the book binding. What you're looking for is to make sure that the two pieces of glass fit snugly into the binding and don't cut off any of the words on the page. Once you take the image, you need to check to make sure they aren't blurry. If an image is blurry, then the photo needs to be retaken. The third type of scanning we do is microfilm. We are currently scanning the Society of Colonial Wars applications through microfilm, which have been photographed on microfilm. Image 1 is a front view of the scanning machine, and image 2 is an aerial view. Image 3 is showing you the computer program that is used to scan the microfilm. In image 4, there's a green arrow pointing to the green dotted box. Inside the green box is what gets scanned. Currently, it is sitting between two pages. Using the computer program, the volunteer would move the microfilm to the right, then move the green box around the page and scan. Once everything gets scanned, you need to double check that all the pages are there and rename the images. This image is the program called XView that we use to process images. The example that is currently up is an Archdiocese book. The green arrow is pointing to the directory of the folders, where a volunteer would go first and find the file that has all the pages they just scanned. The orange arrow is pointing to where the file list of images will show. The red arrow is pointing to the display area. We rename every file to double check every page is there and to give a label to an image that will help others know what it is. There are a couple different ways to rename a file or image. A basic format is just 4 numbers, for example, 0001 or 0101. For specific projects like the Society of Colonial Wars, every image gets renamed with the State Society number dash that page number within the application. For the supplement applications for the Society of Colonial Wars, it is a book number dash the State Society number dash the page number within the applications. For the Archdiocese book pages, for example, Immaculate Conception, Newburyport Marriages, 1852 to 1871. We shorten that down with an acronym to be ICNM 1852-71, and then we put the page number 0023. For the Archdiocese books, sometimes the book pages are a 2-page spread. We scan the pages as individuals. In Photoshop, we open up both pages and combine them to be one document. In this image, the right-hand page is outlined in orange, and the left-hand page is outlined in green, with the border that both pages will share in purple. The orange page will be moved over to the left to be lined up with the purple line. The Archdiocese books are very old. They are from 1789 to 1900. Due to this, they do need conservation. When the books are falling apart, they get sent to the conservation lab. There, they make the books that are falling apart safe to be imaged or scanned by just binding them, mending the pages, releasing enclosures, and scraps of paper. The last step that they take is to create a box for them to live in and be protected. Once everything has been scanned or photographed, the next step is to index the pages. Indexing is the basis of how people search our databases. I'll be talking about the 2 different projects that we are indexing right now. One is handwritten and the other is typed. Whether a volunteer is working at any HTS or remotely, I am available to answer questions. This first example is from Immaculate Conception, Newburyport Baptisms, 1883 to 1890. With the Archdiocese books, I email volunteers 20 pages with an Excel spreadsheet to fill in. Volunteers will read each record and fill in the spreadsheet. For example, the one that is shown, the month is November, and we rate the days, the month, day, and year as numerical. So it's 11/11, year 1883. The primary person, the record is last name Woods, first name in Latin as it's written, then translated into English. The record type is baptism, page number 21. Father's last name is Woods. Father's first name is Joseph. You'll notice that it's the Latin and then English translation. The mother's last name is Keynes and her first name is Anna. Witnesses 1's last name is also Keynes and first name is Jacob. This is Latin for James. Witness 2 last name is Bose and witness 1's first name, witness 2's first name is Maria. This is Latin for Mary. And all of these, whenever it's Latin, we always translate it with an English translation. When there is a baptism record, it will also list out the date of the birth. In the spreadsheet, one person will have 2 lines, one for the baptism date and one for the birth date. The purple arrows pointing to where the birth date is. This person's birthday is 11/6/1883. Everyone's name, primary person, and parents' names stay the same. The record type is changed to birth, and we don't index the witnesses for the birth records because we can't assume that they were at the actual birth. This next example is from St. Mary's Marriages 1849 to 1860. This is an example of indexing a marriage along with what really bad handwriting looks like. For a marriage, the bride gets an entry and the groom gets an entry in the spreadsheet. In this example, the month is 1, day 7, year 1860. Last name Murphy, first name Patrick, and then you fill in who the spouse is along with the witnesses. For the bride, the date stays the same. The last name is Riley, first name Catherine. Fill in her spouse, Murphy Patrick, and then the 2 witnesses. This is an example of what this information looks like on a spreadsheet. When indexing the Archdiocese books, we run into a couple of different languages: Latin, English, French, Italian, German, Portuguese, and Polish. When indexing these languages, we index the Latin name, comma, English. If it is written in French, then it is the Latinized French name, comma, French name. We translate the names out of Latin because if you are looking for your ancestor, you might not realize or know that you need to search for the Latinized version of your ancestor's name. And the database is not smart enough to know that Jonas is John in English. We have translation sheets that we give you when indexing in other languages. At any point, a volunteer might have a question. They can email or call me. This is a list of common Latin phrases that volunteers run into. A lot of times in the baptism records, when they're talking about the day that the person was born, they will talk about the person being born on the same day or in the same month. Here are some handwriting tips to reading cursive. If you aren't sure what a letter is, look around the page for another instance when a similar letter might be written and compare the problem letter. Watch out for names that are spelled using the archaic long S. The double S was written as FS in names such as Ross. Some writers do not cross their T's or place a dot directly above the I, or will do so further away. Be patient and have imagination. Sometimes you might need to leave it for a while and come back, while other times you may need to be very creative as you look past your own biases as to what the word might say. The other project that we are indexing is the New England Historic Genealogical Register. This is our typed indexing project, and what we are indexing is different from the Archdiocese books. These are the record types that we are indexing for the register. There are 17 of them: baptism, birth, burial, census, church admission, church dismissal, court record, death, deeds, divorce, contributor, immigration, marriage, military record, ordination, probate, and residence. This is an example of what the register page might look like. The purple highlighted page is a register page. I've taken a small section from the article, the green rectangle. The orange is what gets indexed. Sarah and her husband have been assigned family numbers. You can see that in this column right here. They've been assigned family numbers so that when this information gets uploaded to the database, all their information is connected. This excerpt gives us a lot of information. When it gets indexed, you can tell what gets indexed from this excerpt based on some rules. Does a person have a name? Does that name have one of the 17 record types I just listed out? And does this record type have either a location and/or a date? Sarah's date of birth, her marriage, and her death all get indexed, along with Thomas's marriage and death. In orange is all the information, and this is how it actually looks like in our spreadsheets that we use to index the register. This is what a full spreadsheet would look like when you're finished indexing a register article. For both of these projects, the Archdiocese and the Register, the indexing gets proofread. The volunteer indexes and double checks their own work. Then another volunteer goes through and compares what is in the spreadsheet to what the page says. Then I look over the spreadsheet. With the Archdiocese books, I wait to have all the spreadsheets back for one single book, and then I combine them all into one spreadsheet. I then give this to Molly, who then looks it over. This is the last slide for my section. If you're interested in volunteering, you can email me, and we can figure out which project works best for you. From here, Molly will explain what happens next.
So, as Rachel explained, our volunteers are working towards two products, image files and Excel spreadsheets. I want to explain how these items turn into databases on our website to give a better understanding of exactly how essential our volunteers' work is to the database team. There are, simply speaking, two elements to making our databases work: the images of the original source and the data that appears on those images. First, I'll explain the image half of the equation. Volunteers scan items as TIFFs, which are a high-resolution archival quality file format. We keep this high-quality image in our archive. Once a volunteer scans a volume, Rachel or I double-check that every page is there. We then convert the TIFF files into JPEG files. JPEG files are smaller, so they're easier for you to load on our website if you've searched someone. And they're easier to work with as we do this process. They also take up less storage room. So I then upload the JPEG files to our storage space in the cloud where our website can access them. Image files are not like Word documents. Your computer doesn't know how to read the information that is contained within them. This is where the Excel spreadsheets come into play. After a volume has been indexed and proofread by the volunteers, I proofread it one more time. Then it is ready to go in our database behind the scenes. Our database takes the form of a series of interrelated tables that help the computer understand what the information is. When you search a name on our search form, the search engine connects the image and the data to bring you that information as a whole. I'm going to delve into an example of searching a database built by volunteer effort, but I just want to emphasize that this will be a surface-level demonstration. For an in-depth dive into how to search our databases, you can watch my colleague Don LeClaire's webinar from a few months ago. So, you'll want to start searching on our homepage using the search menu on the left. I usually start by clicking Advanced Search. Here, I'm on our advanced search page, and I'm looking for the baptism record of a Mary Rogers who was baptized in the Archdiocese of Boston. You can see that I've entered her first and her last name. Let me see if I can click there. So here's her first name, and then her last name. And here in the record type drop-down menu, I've chosen baptism. Down here in our database drop-down menu, I've chosen our specific Archdiocese of Boston database. So now that I've put in my search criteria, I am ready to hit search. Here on the left, you can see our search results page. It'll list everything that fits my criteria. Here I've gotten about 73 records. On the right, you can see that I've clicked View Image and jumped right into that page from the book. So Mary Rogers' record in the Holy Cross volume here happens to be the third one from the top of the page. If instead of clicking on View Image, I had clicked directly on Mary Rogers' name, I would have gotten to our new record display page. And so the record display page, if you click on this View button, you will jump right back to the actual page image. But here on the left, you have all the information that's contained within Mary Rogers' baptism. And this can be helpful to you if the handwriting is hard to read. It can be helpful if you don't understand the format of the record. But we do want you to look at this transcription with a bit of a critical eye. As much as we do try to proofread, we're not always correct in our interpretation of the record. So that leads me to our next topic, reporting errors. Some volunteers really agonize over deciphering the right name. Obviously, we absolutely want to provide quality, credible work on our site. Especially in the case of the Catholic records, though, the handwriting can be really hard to read. If you spent the time to be absolutely sure of a name each time you had a question, you might never finish a set of pages. You can also be sure that your work will be proofread at least twice before making it onto our site. This is not at all to encourage you to do shoddy work. Instead, it is really meant to prevent anxiety and the paralysis in the face of something that you don't know. Also, occasionally, the record taker has scribbled so badly that you, I, anyone is really not going to know the answer. So we have to be able to work with that. But here, I'll show you an example of how to correct something incorrect that made it onto our site. This is a baptism record for a child of French-Canadian descent who was baptized in Boston. You can see that there were 4 errors in Marie Claudia's record. The Latin version of Miriam is missing an R. It should say Miriam. Her last name is actually Bolia. So sometimes volunteers who aren't as familiar with French might mistake those U's at the end of a name for an N. You can see that both her last name over here and her father's last name are going to need to be corrected. And the last mistake pertains to her mother's last name. So it looks like here it was interpreted as Levine when really it says Lebec. So next you can see that I've clicked on the Report an Error button. This will generate a little pop-up screen where I've written a short email detailing all the mistakes in the Bolia family's record. If you are logged into our site, your email address will automatically fill into this space right here. This email goes to webmaster@nehgs.org, which is monitored by the database team. We can then evaluate your comments and make any necessary changes. So here you can see that record display page again for the Bolia family, and you can see that all of their names are updated as I suggested. So that more or less wraps up my tour of how the volunteers' work transforms into a published database. We announce new updates to our database on our blog, dbnews.americanancestors.org. In each new post announcing an update, we thank our volunteers by name who work towards that improvement. You can subscribe to this blog if you're interested by entering your email address on the right. So we thought we would engage you, our participants, in some of the work of reading this handwriting. We've given you 2 examples from a book of baptisms from St. John the Baptist in Quincy. I'll ask you to fill in the missing words. Here, I'll read this record, and we'll give you a minute or 2 before showing the answer, and then we'll flip to the second challenge. So here we have, I baptized blank, born the 28th blank, of blank, and of Ellen, his wife. The sponsors were James Crook and blank Dolan. So here you can see I don't know if you had enough time to come up with some answers. We baptized Matthew, born the 28th of November, of Michael Doran, and you can see that Michael is abbreviated. So when you go to record it in the spreadsheet, we'll want it to say Michael, the abbreviation, just like it says on the page, comma, Michael spelled out. And again, their last name is going to be Doran. And then the sponsors are James Cook and Mary Dolan. And so this challenge sort of exemplifies a couple different things that you might find here in the records. The M is really loopy. And if you weren't sure if that was an M or not, you can sort of look at the Mary and the Matthew and compare how they look and say, oh yeah, I really think that that's definitely an M, so her name is absolutely Mary. You can see that these record takers do not always follow modern conventions for spelling or grammar. So here Matthew only has one T. And we're always really trying to write exactly what's on the page. And then sometimes we're going to offer a standardized example. So here I think it's fine just to record Matthew with one T exactly how it's written. Over here you can see that the J for James, I would probably interpret that as lowercase, but I think here they really were meaning that that's the beginning of his name. That's probably how they wrote their uppercase J's. So here we'll bring you on to our second challenge. I baptized blank, born 3 months on blank last, of blank Courtois and blank wife. Sponsors were Joseph blank and his wife blank. So here you can see that I baptized Mary Josephine, and we'll talk about the spelling of her name in a minute, born 3 months on Monday last, of Alexander Courtois and Renee, his wife. The sponsors were Joseph Mathieu and his wife Josephine Gauthier. So this record shows a few different examples of things that you are going to run into. So right here, this spelling of Josephine is a real disaster. It really looks like the record taker put an extra letter in between the E and the P. So I would spell this Josephphene. We know that they were probably aiming for the more standard Josephine with an I, spelled Josephine, but I really think that this right here is an extra letter. So as I said, we're trying to write exactly what's written on the page. Here I would probably record her name twice. Mary Josephine spelled wrong, but correctly reflecting the page, comma, Mary Josephine spelled correctly. Over here, you can see that the record taker also fumbled the spelling of her godmother's name, but it's a lot more muddled than here, where you really see that line going up. So here, I would probably just record her name as Josephine, spelled in that slightly old-fashioned manner. So Josephene. This record is also probably a French-Canadian family. So you can see their names have some French roots. Again, we would give you maybe our list of common French names or our Latin to French translation spreadsheet. In this case, you know, a lot of the records are written in Latin, but there are a fair number that are just in English too. So you should be ready to sort of, you'll see that spread of languages. And we really want to give you the tools that you need to be able to interpret them. The other thing Rachel mentioned in her handwriting help is that sometimes T's or I's aren't dotted correctly, but you're also going to deal with random marks on the page that don't actually belong to the words. So here in Alexander's name, you can see that dot right above the N, and you sort of want to be looking at that word as a whole. Even though it kind of looks like an I right there, you can see that they're really writing Alexander, and I think that dot is either just a pen mark or something bleeding through from the other side. So you always want to be kind of looking at, is this dot or dash on the page part of one of those letters, or is it not relevant and I should ignore it? So, to conclude, please email Rachel if you're interested in helping with any of these tasks here in the library or from your home from afar. The database team is so grateful to all of our volunteers who help us add new and interesting information to our site. Every so often, we hear from our users who found something new thanks to the new content on our site, which I just love. It's exactly why we're all doing this. In particular, there was one woman who had not been able to find her baptism record for a family member for a really long time. And as we've been working on the Catholic Records Project, she found it had been written in a book of marriages. So she never would have looked there had we not been indexing it. So our volunteers do really wonderful work that not only helps us here on the database team at NEHGS, but it helps researchers from all over who are using our site.
All right. Thank you both, Molly and Rachel. So let's take some time now and answer any questions that you may have. Feel free to type your query into the questions panel. So Heather asks, and Rachel, maybe you could answer this. So Heather asks, can you just kind of review what information should be included when a volunteer reaches out to you at the first, or that initial email? What information should they include for you?
They should start by including their name. If they are more interested in working remotely or on site with us, they should probably also include, if they're interested in working on site, are they interested in scanning the books, learning some image merging techniques? And then, that's just generally a good idea because I can then send you examples of both the Archdiocese projects and the index project, the register project that's being re-indexed. And you can take a further look at those and the instructions. And from there, we can set up a meeting and thoroughly go over how to index both those projects.
And another question for you, Rachel. Jenica asks, so what is kind of the turnaround time between when we reach out to you and when we will be contacted about some different possibilities or different tasks and projects? What typically is your turnaround time for new volunteers?
I try to get back to new volunteers. Sounds like a really long time, within a week. And once I send the initial email out with both those project examples, I try to then, I would like to set up a meeting to talk to you about how to do everything and instructions within the next week. That first initial response really depends on how many of my other volunteers emailed me at the exact same time you emailed me. So hopefully everything will go smoothly.
And then after that initial kind of back and forth, how soon do people get started? Is it, as soon as they have the materials and the spreadsheets, can they get started? I mean, what's your, again, kind of a typical turnaround time? What do you typically see?
Well, once you pick a project, as soon as I get an email back saying, yes, I want to do this, I will email you either an article from the Register or 20 pages from the Archdiocese project, and you will have those before we have a meeting because I'd like you to be able to look them over, look at the page, look at the Excel spreadsheet, and get your first initial reactions of questions that you're unsure about so we can cover all of those in the meeting.
And another question for Rachel. You're just so popular. Erica asks, how familiar should an indexer be with using Excel?
A new volunteer should be familiar enough to type in an Excel cell, know to move the cell, mouse over to type into the next cell, know where the paint bucket tool is so you can highlight the cell. It's very basic Excel. If you want to learn more or there's some other functions that I know that will be helpful for proofreading. I have instructions on those, and we can take the time to go over how to do other things in Excel if you do need to use those.
Thanks. So no kind of, you don't need to use formulas, you don't need to sort data or anything like that. So it's pretty basic Excel knowledge. And like you said, you're always there if people have questions. We have a question, and Molly, I'll turn this one over to you. So Kola asks, is there a minimum number of hours per week that you prefer a volunteer to work? And what is the duration that you're looking for? How long would you ideally like volunteers to work with you for?
You know, we really appreciate all of the help that our volunteers can give. You know, some volunteers work about 4 hours a week, but if you can do less than that, we're not going to say no. We sort of want to work with your schedule. You know, Rachel usually sends out about 20 pages at a time. And so she's going to let you know if for some reason you're taking too long or we really need those pages back. Usually the way most of our volunteers work, they can sort of get it done maybe in a month and give it back to us. But we really want to be flexible and work with your schedule.
So there's no immediate deadline once you kind of send the batch to be indexed out to the remote volunteers. Do you say, we need this back by this day? Or can you just kind of expand on how flexible you are with that, Molly?
A few of our volunteers work better with deadlines. So, you know, with some people we say, oh, we do want this back in a month. But we honestly are pretty flexible, and we have so much going on that there will be a bit of a lag time between when you index it and when I get it up on the site. So usually we don't have any exactly strict deadlines. We can work with you if that would help you work in a more disciplined fashion. And occasionally, you know, maybe someone has let their thing lag for a really long time and we really need it back or really need it done. And so if that's the case, we will email you and say, hey, could you get this done in the next week? And if you can't, we might send it to a different volunteer. So honestly, I know it's maybe not that helpful, but we try to be really flexible since everyone's volunteering for us. They're giving us their time. We want to work with what time they have.
Thank you. Rachel, a question for you. Brian asks, what about volunteers who live in the UK? So do you currently work with volunteers overseas, and are there any kind of issues or special challenges that you want to talk about?
I currently have, I believe, one volunteer who is overseas. I think the only challenge would be the first initial meeting to make sure we're on the same time zone. Otherwise, it's basically the same. It'd be emailing you a set of pages with an Excel spreadsheet and working with your schedule with you for when you need to get them done by. I think for that, a phone conversation wouldn't work. We could probably use Skype. As for most initial meetings, if someone is remote, like in a different state, I'll do a phone call meeting. I'm not sure if that will work for this, so I think I'll look into Skype.
Yes, so Skype or a phone call is of course an option. You don't have to come into Boston or into the library to meet with Rachel or Molly. You can certainly have that initial conversation over the phone or online. So Molly, a few questions for you about Excel. So does the volunteer need to have Excel? Do they need to have a certain level or version of Excel? Is it something that we can provide? If you could answer those basic questions about Excel, that'd be great.
So we need your final product in a .xlsx file format. So you can use Google Sheets to do this. You can work in Numbers if you have a Mac. That's sort of like the Mac proprietary Excel version. But the thing about Numbers is that it will save to a different Mac kind of file format. So then when you send your file to us here at NEHGS, we won't be able to read it. So that let me repeat, .xlsx file format is what we can read. So there's a variety of programs like Google Sheets that aren't Excel that you can use to do that. I think Google Sheets is probably the most popular free one. So we cannot help you get a copy of Excel, but we can definitely give you ideas for like what are other free options that would work. And if you do have a Mac and are using numbers, we can show you. You just have to follow a couple steps to export your file to the correct format. Does that answer all of your question?
I think it does. If you have any other questions, feel free to type that into the questions panel. It might be about what version of Excel you need or something like that. We do have a few more minutes here. So Molly, maybe another question for you. Paul asks, do you provide feedback in the event that a word or a letter is incorrect? I mean, so when you're proofreading, if you do see, say, one error, do you provide feedback? If you see several errors, do you provide feedback?
Feedback is definitely something that we've been working on providing. I think that it would be great if any new volunteers to Rachel get feedback sooner rather than later. Some of our volunteers who've been doing it for a while, I might not get to them as often. Often people really just make mistakes, like maybe they make a typo or maybe they don't understand this particular person's handwriting, so they've mistranscribed a few things. If someone is making major mistakes, we'll absolutely talk to them. If someone is working with a new language for the first time, we'll also try to proofread their work sooner rather than later and get them some more feedback. So it's, again, it's sort of like we don't have an exact, like, you will definitely get feedback every time, but if there's major problems, if you're working on something new, those are when we really try to tell you exactly what you're doing wrong. Sorry, it's not wrong. It's just like maybe you're not quite seeing the right thing yet, and we want to help you get there.
And I suppose if, as you're indexing the records and you want feedback, you know, a volunteer can always ask for feedback or additional support, especially maybe the first round of batched pages. Just kind of, you know, how does this look? What do you think? How can I improve? Do you, Molly, I'll ask you again. I mean, do you often have, especially the first time that someone volunteers and provides work to you, are you more likely to maybe have that conversation then as well?
Absolutely. And I wanted to mention, Rachel mentioned that paint bucket tool. And so what you would be using that for is, say you're working on a batch of records and you come across a name that you don't know. We ask you to highlight that cell in yellow. So then that's sort of marking to us or the proofreaders that you have a question there. And so, of course, you can like call Rachel or email her and ask her your questions in person, but using that paint bucket tool to highlight your cell in yellow, that can sort of mark, I have a question here, I'm not sure what's going on. So rather than, we definitely want you to mark things in yellow and ask us questions rather than be sort of unsure and just sort of turn it in a blank sheet with no questions. So we definitely want to work with you so that you understand what you're doing, so that you're doing good work for us and enjoying what you do.
And Rachel, a question for you. So Marcia asks again, typically how many pages are in a batch that you send?
So for the Archdiocese projects, I send about 20 per volunteers here. Again, we're with volunteers, and some volunteers like to work with 10 pages. It works better with their schedule. And some people, it works better to get a batch of 50 pages at a time, and so that they have a longer term project that they're working with. For the register article,
your audios.
Those articles vary between being sentences to a paragraph to being 1 page to being 4 pages to being maybe 15. They're 15 pages. They're averaging about 6 pages per article. So I might send you 3 or 4 articles at a time. That way you have a couple of things to work on. If the batch might be like 2 articles being 1 page and 1 article being 4 pages. Some, like I said, some volunteers like to have more articles at a time, or they like to have fewer, and we can work with you on depending on what you want to work with.
I think your audio was cutting in and out there a little bit, but just to repeat, and correct me if I'm wrong, so for the Archdiocese project, you often send between 10 pages, it could be 20 pages sometimes, if the volunteer wants it, 50 pages. So that's also, I think, kind of the theme throughout this is there's a lot of flexibility between you and the volunteer and figuring out what works best for them. If they prefer to have a few pages at a time, or if they prefer to have a lot of pages at a time, you can work with them on that. And then also for the Register project, you mentioned because the length of the articles vary, you might send 3 to 4 articles at a time. But again, if the volunteer says, bring it on, you can send more articles. But at least for the Register, you're sending an entire article as a chunk. They wouldn't get a few pages. It would be the entire article. So you can really kind of see the context of the material and include it that way. So I'm going to end the presentation there. If you have additional questions for either Molly or Rachel, I will be including their emails in my follow-up email to you, but it's rachel.adams@nehgs.org. That's Rachel's, and molly.rogers@nehgs.org. So I will be, like I said, sending you their email addresses in a follow-up later today. So if you are interested in volunteering or learning more about our projects and programs, certainly reach out to them. If you are deep into your family history research and you want help with your research, also consider scheduling a consultation or hiring our research services teams, and those email addresses are there on the screen in front of you. But thank you all for joining us today. As you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback. As we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings, any and all feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. If you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit our online learning center at americanancestors.org/education. I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.